Can I go?
Yep, go for it.
Hi, my name is Eileen Robinson. I'm with Reycraft Books. We are a new trade publisher. Our focus is publishing authors and illustrators from underrepresented groups. And I'm sitting here with the amazing Joe Bruchac. He is the author of the new Powwow Series, and I'm so happy and so honored to be in his presence. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm so glad you're here.
Happy to be here.
And I want to talk to you about the Powwow Series that you are writing for us.
Of course.
And ask you how that came to be.
Well, when I was given the opportunity to create a series of books that were of interest to that age and would represent a community of people that was underrepresented, my first thought was one of the most common and one of the most enjoyable parts of contemporary Native American life, and that's the powwow. And to have kids be the center of the story, but also children with their grandparents, seemed to be the right way to do it. So each book has a different episode, a kind of miniature detective story that my two young characters have to solve in the framework of different powwows that they travel to with the grandparents who are craftspeople and selling their goods at each of these powwows.
Oh, and we love the series, as you know, and you have done 3 of them for us so far, and this is the first book, The Powwow Thief. Can you tell us a little bit about this particular story and maybe your favorite scene in the story?
Well, the two children in the story, a brother and a sister, have very different personalities. The sister is the one who's sort of the dominant member of the family and very intellectual. She's always reading. And the brother is a little bit resentful of his sister. He calls her big sister because she's slightly older by a few minutes.
Okay.
But between the two of them, there's a real connection with the grandparents, with each other, and with their community. So they're not kids who are disenfranchised or kids who are feeling out of place. And I wanted this to be contemporary Native kids because often when people think of Native Americans, they think in the distant past. They think of people who are not present, and yet these are kids with cell phones. This is a little girl who's interested in ornithology, so she's learning the names and the habits of birds, which is part of the plot of this particular story. And yet they're helping out their grandparents for the summer as they travel on the powwow circuit, which is what a lot of contemporary Native people do. They work throughout the wintertime making various crafts, such as the jewelry their grandmother makes. And then when the good weather comes, when it's warmer, they travel from city to city, from part of the country to another part of the country where these powwows are taking place.
Okay.
And I also, I think one of my favorite scenes is when they're giving the booth over to a friend of theirs they call Sleepy Mickey, who's based on an actual friend of mine.
Oh, wow.
Who is much more interested in eating his cookie and dozing while he's supposed to be watching the booth. And I love that little scene where it's gone. He says, "What, my cookie?" "No, the necklace." "Oh."
Yeah, and his cookie is much more important than the necklace.
Yes.
Well, this is interesting. Powwows. You could have written about anything, in your travels. Why powwows in particular?
Well, for one, I've been involved in the powwow scene for decades. We actually run our own Native American festival once a year in Saratoga Springs, New York.
Okay.
Get about 4,000 people coming to it.
Oh, wow.
And it's myself and my family who've been running it for the last more than a decade. I've also performed as a storyteller and a flute player at powwows. And I love to go to them because there's so many interesting things are going on. There are so many interesting things going on, everything from dancing, all kinds of traditional Native food, and the work that people do is just beautiful. I'm wearing a few things right now that are from the powwow circuit, like this little bear claw necklace, which was given to me, and this little hishi, which is shell beads made by a friend of mine who's a craft person named Powhatan Eagle.
Okay.
And there's a real personal nature to the powwow. It's not like cold, mercantile kind of setting. It's people getting to know people, and sometimes you make friends with people who've made something, and year after year you come back and renew your friendship.
Okay, that's wonderful. I hope to actually go to a powwow one day.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that everything you've talked about, you've actually included,
Mm-hmm.
in their adventures.
Yes, and I think it's important to write about what you know or write about what you'd like to know, one of the two. But the thing about so many things that are written about contemporary or Native people in general is they're written from a distance by someone who has no real experience. And I'm not saying that only Native Americans can write about Native Americans. That's kind of a silly thing to say. But you have to write about what you know, especially when you're writing for young people. To me, they're the most important audience. They are the future, and they need to be given truth. They need to be given opportunity. They need to be given a wider view of the world than just what is in front of your own face. And I think the whole Reycraft series has that kind of philosophy behind it. So I'm delighted to be part of it.
And that leads me to my next question. Why Reycraft?
I would say the simple answer to that is that Wiley edited the book and asked me to do it. I was said, would you like to do this? Okay.
Love Wiley.
Yes, yeah. But I think also I like the idea of working, one, with a new publisher, and two, with a publisher who clearly wanted to incorporate a Native point of view,
Yes.
and therefore got a Native illustrator.
Yes.
I've had arguments over the years with other publishers who have not wanted to take on a new illustrator who was Native American, but to stick with someone who was not Native, who I knew would not do as good a job in representing the culture and the reality that this particular illustrator, and this is his first illustration, his first book. It's really great, and there's a lovely picture of Dale DeForest in the back, and Dale is really cool. I've not met him in person, but I love his work.
Well, speaking of Dale, you both are from the same nation, tribe?
No.
No, you're not.
No, we're from different nations. In fact, what you'll find is, I love the bio in here. It basically talks about, I'm an enrolled member of the Nulhegan Band of the Abenaki Nation. So that's in Vermont and the Northeast. And Dale was born in Tuba City, Arizona, raised on the Navajo Reservation. Okay. So two very different tribal nations. And that's important for people to recognize, too, that here in North America, in the United States, there are more than 500 recognized, tribally recognized by, and nationally, federally recognized different nations. And we have dozens and dozens of different languages and traditions. But there are certain things we have in common. And I think one thing that Native people have in common is this long and complicated relationship with American culture, where we've often been stereotyped and expected to be a certain way. And I like the idea that you see a grandmother wearing glasses and not wearing regalia. She's just wearing everyday clothing, and a grandfather wearing everyday clothing. At the same time, you have people in the pictures who are wearing traditional regalia, the sort of thing that you would imagine Native people wearing. Right. So you get the picture of a complicated and not one-dimensional world.
Right, right. And how did you and Dale come together to do this series?
Well, we were brought together by Wiley. Wiley found Dale. I didn't know Dale before this. Okay. And one of the nice things that Dale did, he wanted specific references for Northeastern powwows. Okay. So we sent him a whole bunch of photographs from different powwows that we've put on over the last decade.
Wonderful.
So there's a very direct reference to the way people would dress. For example, if you look at the drum group in the powwow, the people who are drumming and singing, none of them are wearing regalia. They're just wearing the kind of everyday clothes that drummers are known to wear. In fact, often you'll see the drummers just sort of dressed in a way that you wouldn't know that they were drummers unless you saw them sitting at the drum, and that's where they are. There's that kind of picture of them.
Okay, yeah, I'm just hoping to find one of the pictures here. Well, this is a really nice spread.
Yeah.
As well.
If you look at the back page, on the bottom, you'll see the drummers, back page of the book, back cover.
There we go. That's right.
And you can see they're just wearing sort of everyday clothes.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful how you can mix the history with contemporary, especially for today's kids. I
think so. I think it's important to have a sense of history. And that's one of the things that often a lot of young people don't. To them, something as recent as the Afghan War is ancient history. Right. And yet I grew up with friends and relatives who had been in World War II. I actually knew World War I veterans. So there's a long spread of history that has been left behind. And again, I think that the Reycraft books are doing a good job of giving a window into different histories, a broader and a deeper view of history through the books that they've chosen to publish.
Thank you. Thank you. And what would you say to librarians, to parents, to teachers when they are picking up your book and using it in various ways?
I would say that in the tradition of Native storytelling, a good story should be interesting, so people will pay attention to it, but it should also contain a lesson, so people will learn from it. And I think that's something you'll find in the whole series of the 3 books I chose to write, that they are, I hope, entertaining, but they also, each of them has a number of different lessons that can be learned in a way that's not just hitting you over the head with it. A good story stays with you, and you may not realize until later the lesson you've learned from that story. And I also think that because of the format, they're bright, they're accessible,
Yes.
they're fun to look at,
Yes.
and 2nd and 3rd graders really need things that are enjoyable.
Yes.
They don't need to have things that are purely didactic.
Yes.
And it's a mistake sometimes that we make. We think we have to pound information into children, or sometimes you just have to hand it to them in an accessible format, and they choose to absorb it. And I hope that's what will be true of this series.
I think it will. I think it will. So what are next steps for you?
Well, as always, I'm working on new books. That's something that I love to do. I just love to write. It's who I am. I'm also doing a lot of storytelling. And I'm working very closely with our Nulhegan Abenaki Nation.
Wonderful.
We are working with the state of Vermont. The government has actually been very cooperative with us. In fact, my son Jesse, who is a fluent speaker of our language, will actually be teaching Abenaki at Middlebury College.
Oh, wow.
He's
That's
developing
terrific.
a new immersion program at Middlebury. He and I were asked to open the first session of the Vermont State Legislature this year. So we went to the state capitol and delivered an opening, a benediction in Abenaki and in English. And we'll be doing more of that sort of thing with the Vermont community and with our nation over the next several months.
Okay. And for those who are just discovering Joe Bruchac, Joe, how many books have you written? You've been doing this a long time.
I think right now it's over 170.
My goodness. Okay. And do they all center around Native American characters?
I would say the majority of the books I've written, which are for young readers, and young writers, I hope too, are focused on Native American concerns and Native American characters. But my family is mixed ancestry. I have Slovak ancestry on my dad's side, thus the name Bruchac. My mother's side is Bowman. My father's side is Bruchac. And I've written 2 novels that have been published, which have Slovakia as a center. In fact, one of them called Dragon Castle is a sword and sorcery novel. And I've also written lots of poetry. I wrote much poetry. Was actually a graduate of the Syracuse University writing program and had 12 books of poetry published before I ever published anything for kids.
Wow.
And my poems could be about anything. I write a lot about nature. And I think it's important for us to have our eyes open to the world around us.
So you need to write a book of poetry for us.
I could certainly do that if anyone asked me.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to say to the world of readers and the educators who are, handing your books to children?
I think we need to trust children. I think that children are our best audience. Sometimes we underestimate them.
Okay.
We don't realize how much they know. And I became a writer because I had children of my own. In many ways, I became a storyteller in self-defense. So if you have children, you understand what I'm talking about. And if you are a person who loves to read, then show that love of reading to your students. I've been in schools where everybody, every teacher, even the janitorial staff are all carrying around a book that they're reading. So model reading to kids and let them know it's not a chore, but something enjoyable. Another cool thing to do, if you have kids who are having trouble with reading, whatever age, usually it's boys, read to them. Read to them. Don't ask them to read aloud. Don't ask them questions about it. Just choose an interesting book and read to them, and you'll find that their own ability as readers will increase by being read to.
Thank you, Joe. Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure. Olioni, thank you. Nidobak, my friends. Hypoallergenic, of course. I use hypoallergenic
Actually,
makeup.
I am glad that you remind me of that.
Uh-oh.
You know you have to do it, right?
Seriously? You serious?
No,
I'm
the
serious.
only thing we really use is the oil absorbing
Okay.
sheet.
Yes.
And it does make it look, it makes everybody look better.
It's a good idea.
Really?
So if you could each take one,
Okay.
Yes.
and you just apply it to like your forehead area.
Okay.
We only need a couple of these, but I'll just run through. So first, it's a story about blank.
This is a story about two contemporary Native American children at a powwow.
The illustrations are blank.
The illustrations are accessible, they're bright, and they're really accurate in depicting contemporary Native life.
Story.
This is a very clear, simple, and yet deep story.
This story. This story speaks to blank.
This story speaks to children of all ages, but in particular those who wish to know about or feel themselves part of Native American contemporary culture.
You're doing this book, I thought.
When I first picked up the finished book, I thought, this is so much better than I actually expected it to be, and I thought it was going to be good, but this is beyond good. When I started this book, I felt inspired because it's the kind of story I wanted to tell for a long time, but not yet until now had the opportunity.
Add or any short things that you think would capture people?
Buy this book or I'll come to your house and beat you up. Or send my sons. They're martial artists. They're bigger than me.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.